this is my tarp, which I made out of a material called tyvek. I believe this is 42 grams per square meter, which is the lightest tyvek I think you can commonly get. It's about equivalent in weight to about 20 or 30 denier nylon, so it's not super light. However, it's very cheap and very easy to work with. So all it really is just a big piece of tyvek. It's 1.5 meters in width and twice that in length, 3 meters. So I think this is just about the right size, just big enough, but no more than that. And yeah, I just taped tyvek tape around the edge, folded a hem over to prevent it from ripping, hammered in some grommets. You can see there, tie-up points. I did 8 total, so the 4 corners and then 1 on each edge. Also, the weight of it, it's 363 grams for just the tarp, which is heavier than I thought it would be. The actual material, without the tape and the grommets, weighed about 200 grams, or maybe it was like 197, I believe. So the weight of the tape running around the edge actually adds quite a bit, because tyvek tape is quite thick stuff. It does give me a decent amount of confidence that it's not going to rip. In conjunction with this, I use really thin Groundsheet. So that's what it is. It's like window insulation film. Costs £5. You can get it at Wix. And yeah, so get a sheet of this, cut it to whatever size you need, and that's pretty much the lightest Groundsheet. This is 47 grams, and it's 2.5 by 1 meter. Obviously you need pegs and guy lines, so I have 6 MSR needle pegs. I think 6 is the right amount. Any more I don't think is necessary. You can get away with 4 or 5 for certain pitches, but you can't do an A-frame with that, so it does limit your options. And guidelines, 6 guidelines, because 6 pegs, 6 guidelines. I've got 2 that are 1 feet long. So I've got 2 more which are 2 feet long, so twice that. And then 2 which are 6 feet long, and they've got an adjustable like thing. I don't know what you call it. So it can vary from 3 feet to 6 feet. So yeah, 6 guidelines, 6 pegs, a Groundsheet, and a tarp. It's really all you need for a shelter. I think the whole thing is about this much in weight. I don't know exactly. On a side note, my new shoes arrived, so I'll be able to test out these as well. So, I'm in some random piece of woodland in Surrey, and I'm gonna set up my tarp to show how it works. Currently, there's a tree which the camera's being placed in at the moment, and that's something to look for, because you can use that as cover from the weather. The ground as well is quite soft. Here I've got the tarp set up in a half pyramid. I have this side raised slightly higher than that side, and that's because I would sleep with my head end there and my feet at that end. And I'd sort of push myself into that corner and have a bit of extra space here, because then it's got a more open feel to it rather than being completely enclosed. I sometimes would also position this guideline and hold it up with a stick so that it's sort of like that. So inside or underneath the shelter there's quite a bit of space for one person. I really wouldn't work with two unless you were like very close to each other. You do need to make sure if you pitch in a half pyramid that this side, which is open, is protected. So here I've got a tree that should stop some wind. If I, were actually going to sleep in this pitch, which I'm not planning on, I'd probably put it a bit closer to the tree, or I might even tie it to the tree rather than using the pole. That way it's closer in, more protection. Tarps are very adaptable, but you need to make sure you adapt them correctly to the surroundings you have. Otherwise you can just get wet and it's not fun. I'm now going to set it up in a more exposed position to show what I would have if it was fairer weather, and the advantage of that is that you get more space underneath, which is nice. Here's the tarp set up in a lean-to position, which is the simplest, most straightforward, obvious way to set it up. It takes advantage of all of the tarp, meaning you get the full 3 meters of length underneath it. You don't sort of have the sides coming down, which reduces the space underneath. So it feels really nice sleeping underneath it, because you get lots of exposure. However, assuming you pitch it in the right position, you can still get excellent weather protection. The disadvantage of it is that it is very location specific. If you were to just pitch this in the open, you're pretty much guaranteed to get soaked, because well, it only covers you from one side and it's just completely open and the ends don't offer any protection. So in specific scenarios this works really well. Other scenarios not so much. The other advantage of it is you only need 4 pegs to set it up. I have used 5, but you don't really need that last one. So if you want the absolute lightest setup, you can just exclusively pitch it in a lean-to and only bring 4 pegs, if that's what you want. Yeah. Underneath it you get loads of space, and you can got tons of extra room at the head end, but you do have a really nice sort of exposed feel to it, just sleeping here, and then you've just got the open air, which is, I think, one of the most overlooked advantages of tarps. I suppose it's also another advantage of bivvies and like hammocks without a tarp and things like that. You just feel very connected to the land. Sort of a setup similar to the lean-to is the flying V, where instead of having both ends held up with poles, you put one into the ground and then just have the one side. It does give you good protection from 2 sides, similar to a half pyramid, but I don't really like this shelter because the end of it is often dangerously close to the footbox section of your sleeping bag, and so you can sometimes have it you have condensation on your sleeping bag because the inside of the tarp could be touching it. Also, if you encounter snow, tarps sag enormously whenever snow gets on them, so you're pretty much guaranteed to have that touching you in this setup. if you were a bit shorter than me, you might find this a bit better. It's another option that exists, but I don't really like it. And then finally we've just got the simple A-frame, which is probably the most common, the most popular, and most well-known way of setting up a tarp. But I'm not really a huge fan of it. And the reason why is because it's not a very efficient way of setting it up if you're trying to push the limits of what size tarp you can do. This tarp's only 1.5 meters wide, and you can see there isn't a lot of space underneath it, and it's also quite awkward to get in and out of this shelter, because you've got this pole at the entrance blocking it. On larger tarps, this would probably be the most obvious shelter to go for, but on small tarps, unless you are in a very exposed area which would necessitate this, I don't think it's a very good way of setting it up. Now, despite that, it is clear that this shelter does offer pretty good protection from the weather. You've got both sides covered. The only area where you could possibly get wet is obviously the bit at the front. At the back, I pitched it quite a bit lower than at the front. But yeah, it does offer very good protection, but it's just not very easy to get in and out of, and it doesn't have that same exposure of having like an entire side of the tarp open. It just sort of feels quite enclosed, more like a tent, so it could be an advantage or it could be a disadvantage depending what you like. I would say that if I had a much larger tarp than this, perhaps like twice the width, this would be a much better shelter because there's lots of space underneath it and it's much easier to get in and out of, and those are the two like main disadvantages of this style. And also, if you know there's two people, it means that there isn't just one side to get out of. There's sort of, you can get out either side of the pole, so each person has like their own exit, which is nice. But yeah, in general, I don't really use this setup that often unless it's exposed or you know, if I need to for whatever reason, it's available, but it's not the immediate shelter I'll go for. I forgot to record myself setting this up, so I'll just tell you roughly how to do it. You want to start by pegging in the two corners on one side, and then on the opposite side bring up the pole, and then you'll have tension running sort of diagonals from that midpoint to that corner, and then that'll sort of keep everything in place, and then you can set up that side and then the two corners here. So that's generally the easiest way to set it up without, you know, the whole thing collapsing, which is annoying. So that's like roughly how to set up a tarp. I'll probably put like links to the materials I bought for it in the description. So yeah, I'd recommend making it yourself if you need a reasonably light, small tarp for backpacking. Very cheap. Maybe it was like 30 quid in total for all the materials. Good luck if you're planning on making one yourself. Also, if you have any suggestions of like how I can improve these videos, that would be greatly appreciated. Or just topics I should cover, or like any questions about backpacking in the UK you might have. The comment section is for that. Yeah, because I have no clue what I'm doing. So here it is set up in a lean-to, which is, oh, she's by the way.